Now, a young girl goes to school for the first day, and she's in science class, and her teacher's a very pretty science teacher, and she's an atheist. And she starts to give a talk the first day of school in science class, and she presents her first lecture, and it's all about why Christianity is old-fashioned and passé, and why everybody really should get on the modern bandwagon and become an atheist. And get with it and get modern. Get rid of the old archaic religions and just become an atheist. And at the end of the class, she asks for a show of hands, how many would like to consider becoming an atheist? And everybody in the class raised their hand because she was a very pretty teacher and they didn't want to make enemies on the first day of school. So they all raised their hand, except in the back, a little Lucy didn't raise her hand. And the teacher said, "Lucy, I noticed you didn't raise your hand. Is there a reason why?" And Lucy said, "Yes, teacher." She said, "I have no interest in being an atheist. I will never be an atheist." And the teacher said, "Oh, really, Lucy? Well, can you tell us why? What are you if you're not an atheist?" She said, "I am a Christian." And she says, "Well, why are you a Christian and why would you never be an atheist?" And Lucy said, "Well, my mother is very intelligent and she's a Christian. And my father is just brilliant and reads lots of books, and he's a very convinced Christian. So I'm a Christian too." And the teacher said, "Lucy, that's not a very good reason to be a Christian. What if your mother was an idiot and your father was a blithering fool? What would you be then?" She said, "Probably an atheist." So I want to first make a disclaimer. I haven't always been a Catholic. I was raised as a Baptist, an evangelical Protestant. I never studied formally theology or philosophy. I am not an academic, and I have not studied atheism in any deep way or taught classes on it or anything else. I'm more of a popularizer, somebody who tries to take complicated things and make it simple for people to understand. If I came in here today and I gave a deeply academic dissertation, read a paper on atheism, quoting all the latest philosophers and theologians and atheists and so on, which I couldn't do anyway, I should let you know that, because I haven't put my energies and time into that. I've done more on the biblical and historical type issues. A lot of people would fall asleep if I did that. But I try to make it a popular talk and help people to understand kind of the simple issues regarding whether we believe in how we believe, who we are, where we came from, and what we are. So that's what I want to do. And I want to start out by saying that actually, you all know Sherlock Holmes. He's one of my favorites. I've read Sherlock Holmes stories ever since I was a kid. When we got married and had our kids, I bought the complete writings of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and read the Sherlock Holmes stories. And then when the great series came out with Jeremy Brett, we bought the whole DVD series of Sherlock Holmes. And the reason I bring that up is because I am going to present this in a way that all of us are Sherlock Holmes. All of us are detectives with magnifying glass and inquisitive minds that are going to go out now and discover where we came from and who we are and why we're here, and is there meaning to life or is there not meaning to life. And so I want to begin by saying that all of us are detectives. All of us are, in a way, philosophers as well. If we're not academic philosophers, then we are street philosophers, because we have to come up with a perception. Every single human being has a concept, a philosophy, or some idea of who they are, why they're here, where they came from, where they're going, what their purpose in life, if there is a purpose or not a purpose, what the meaning of it all is. And whether we've studied it formally or not studied it formally, everybody has this perspective. It's called a worldview, your view of the world and of yourself. And so we can arrive at this worldview in several ways, since all of us have one. The atheist has one view of the world. There is no God. We got here by chance. I am just a collection of molecules and hormones and electronics. I'm a complicated machine. The Christian has a worldview that I'm made in the image of God. There's a creator, an artist who put this all together, and therefore I have meaning and purpose in my relationship to him. The Muslim has a worldview of Allah, and the difference in many ways between Christianity and Islam is that in Christianity we have a God who we view as Father, therefore we are family, and in Islam you have a God who is master, and therefore we are slaves. And this is a basic difference between a worldview and who we are and how we got here and what our purpose is. And so there's a lot of different worldviews, but there are two ways that we can come to a worldview, that we have obtained the view that we have of who we are and the whole meaning of existence. One of them is that we study it, we think about it, we're intelligent, we analyze it, we compare differing views, and we choose our worldview. We choose it as a rational, intellectual, religious, or whatever. After analyzing like a detective, we come to a conclusion that this is what I believe. I am an atheist because I've come to this conclusion, or I'm a Christian because I've analyzed it and I put 2 plus 2 together and come out that it's 4, and here I am. The other way we get our worldview is to catch it the same way you catch a cold, by being very close to somebody else who has it. Like you catch the measles. How do you catch the measles? If you have the measles and I get close to you, oh, I got the germs, I've got it, now I've got the measles. Too many people get their worldviews without thinking about them, without analyzing them, without putting 2 and 2 together. They just catch it by being close to somebody else who has it, or by going to a certain school and they just believe what they're taught here. I have to admit that I did not originally choose my worldview as a Christian by analyzing it, thinking about it, and deciding it. I was raised in a Baptist family, and along with my mother's milk, I became a Baptist. I caught it from my parents. And then as I grew up, I was a Baptist Christian. I never thought about it. In fact, it was wrong for me to think about it. My mom and dad told me whenever I asked questions about it, they said, that's called doubting. You should not do that because it's a sin. You should never ask questions and be doubting and ask these questions, because that's a sin to question these things. And I remember the Beatles came out and I bought Abbey Road and the Magical Mystery Tour and all of these. I had all their albums, and my mom said, you have to throw them all away because they're from the devil. And I said, how do you know they're from the devil? She said, don't you ask those questions. Of course they're from the devil. That's what the Baptist church teaches. And so is dancing and smoking and all these other things are from the devil. And so we had to throw them all away. And I couldn't even question those things because it was a matter of faith. Now, I'm not convinced that Christianity is simply a matter of faith. And I think that in a way, we do ourselves a great disservice when we refer to things as our faith community. I don't know if you do that here, but in America, people don't like to call it, I go to the Catholic Church. I go to my faith community. Or I'm going to my faith classes. Because we play right into the hands of the world when we do that, because the world looks at us and says, you don't have anything rational about what you believe. You believe all of this by faith. It's a fairy tale. It all begins with once upon a time God created the heavens. It doesn't begin with once upon a time. It is not a fable or a fairy tale. We're dealing with good and sufficient evidence for what we believe. But when we use the word, or we're joining a faith community, or we're going to our faith formation classes, I object to those in a way, and I know that they're common parlance today and way of speaking, but I always object to it anyway because I'm not politically correct and I usually buck the system anyway. And so when you say that it's a faith community, what the world thinks of is, see, they can affirm it themselves. What they believe is not true. It's not scientific. It's not evidence. They believe it by faith. It's a myth. It's something that's it's non-confirmable, non-verifiable. It's all faith. And therefore the world says, keep it inside your 4 walls and keep it inside your head because we don't want anything to know about it. Don't try to push it on us because it's all a fairy tale and a myth and it's something you believe by faith and you think it's true because you believe it. Actually, it's the exact opposite. I am a skeptic by heart, and because I am a skeptic, I am a Catholic. That's the reason I'm a Catholic, is because I question things, because I challenge things, because I don't accept things at face value. It is not, I'm convinced that what I believe as a Christian is not true because I believe it. Rather, it is I believe it because it is true. Now, I was raised a Christian. I could have been raised a Mormon or a Muslim or a Jehovah's Witness or an atheist or a Hindu or a pagan or a Buddhist or anything else. I could have been raised that way, and probably I would have started out my life just as convinced being a Hindu as I was convinced being a Baptist. But over time in my life, I stopped and said, especially when I saw the irrationality that it was presented from my family and from the Baptist church I went to, that it was completely divorced from reason, completely divorced from anything verifiable or historical, that I had to say, wait a minute, I don't think I want to be a Christian. I think it's a fairy tale. I think it's not true. Don't think this is something I want to do, especially if it's going to invest my whole life in it. And it's also very restrictive on my life. I was a teenager when I began to think this, and Christianity was very restrictive. And I liked Paul's comment that if there is no resurrection from the dead, then eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. But when you bring religion into it and you bring this whole idea of God and morality and so on imposing upon you, then it really restricts your life. So I had to go through a period of my life where I researched and analyzed and read. And I came to the conclusion over a period of time that there was a God and that Christianity was the expression of how he was expressing himself in the world. And then I became a very devout Christian. I was still an evangelical Protestant, but I've always been one who searches and questions and analyzes and doubts. And so then I questioned my evangelical Protestantism and eventually 16 years ago became a Catholic and found myself in the Catholic Church, not with a bunch of imbeciles, not with a bunch of lame brain zombies, but I found myself in a community of people in a church that has the best and the brightest minds in history and all through the world. Men like Augustine and Aquinas and all of the others. I found myself now in the company not of idiots, but of very intelligent people who were Christians because they were convinced it was cosmically true, theologically true, historically, philosophically, and every way it was the truth. So everybody is a philosopher, and we all get our views, but I caught mine like you catch measles from my family, and only later did I analyze it and reflect on it and choose the one I want. And unfortunately, the culture that we live in, whether you're living here in Australia or living in the United States where I come from, or whether you're in any of these modern Western civilizations, as we call them, we are being lied to and deceived on a daily basis, and our children are being lied to and deceived on a daily basis as well. We watch television, and God plays no part in the real world in television. God plays no part in the real world in education. I don't know about your school system here, but in the public school in the United States, it is more illegal to speak about God in America than it is in the Soviet Union or in Russia today. They have more freedom to talk about God in the classroom in Russia than they do in the United States. Because they say that you cannot mix religion, state and religion and government. And what that means is that anything religious you have to keep out of the schools, and you can only talk about what? What are you going to replace it with? Another religion. Atheism and humanism and materialism is a religion. So what they're doing is they're being very discriminatory against one kind of religion and in favor of another kind of religion. Islam is able to, you can talk about Islam in the public schools in America, but don't you dare talk about Christianity. And this is a tragedy. So our children are going to schools in America, which is why, by the way, we never sent our kids to schools. I told you I was politically incorrect, and I buck the system. I am not one who follows the crowd. I swim upstream. And back in 1980, when we had our first kid, in 1976 she was born, my wife said, I am not going to send them to the public schools because I can do a better job at home. And we homeschooled our kids all the way through high school. And we taught them both sides. I'm not also the other side. Don't ever mention atheism in the house. No, we don't want our kids to ever even hear that word. Absolutely not. I have nothing to be afraid of. I want them to understand the atheist philosophy as well as Christianity and let them decide. I have nothing to be afraid of with Christianity because it is true. I remember at 7 years old, my daughter Cindy said to me, Dad, I know that we have 20,000 books in our house today. We didn't have as many in that day. But I remember her saying, Dad, when I grow older, I think I'm not going to be a Christian. And I said, why not, Cindy? Why don't you think you'll be a Christian? There's a little 7-year-old girl. She said, because that's what you're telling me I have to believe, but I'm not sure it's going to be true when I grow up and study it for myself. And And I said, you're a very smart girl. I said, why don't you do me a favor? I said, why don't you think about it now, whether you think there's a God or not, and you let me know. She said, well, Dad, what do you think? I said, Cindy, you think for yourself. You're a smart girl. I said, I've got all these books. And she said, but I don't want to read your books, Dad, because your books are all about why there is a God, and I want to find out the other side. So I said, you think about it. You're a smart girl. I'm not going to answer your question. She thought about it and thought. You could see her. We still remember. She just would be sitting there thinking. I said, what are you thinking about, Cindy? She says, you know. Okay. 2 weeks later, she came back to me and says, Dad, can I talk to you? And I said, yes. She said, I've concluded that there is a God. I said, did you really now? How did you come to this conclusion? She said, Dad, it's really pretty simple. She said, I look at the walls in our house, and you have pictures all on the walls, and they're in frames. Not only did somebody have to paint all those pictures and put them in frames and hang them there because they didn't get there by themselves. And she said, I look at our house, and I look at this, and I say, somebody had to put this all together. It took somebody was thinking about it and could do something to do all of this. It didn't happen by chance. And when I walked outside, she said, I looked up and I saw stars and trees and clouds and mountains, and I realized that that couldn't have gotten here all by itself either. Somebody has to be behind everything, and therefore I concluded there's a God. So, Dad, I'm going to stay being a Christian. And now, guess what? She's a PhD in philosophy and one of the best defenders of the Catholic faith you're going to find anywhere. But I never preached to her. I never preached to that girl. I never preached to my kids. I never secluded them and protected them from other views. What I did was open with them, and I showed them the superiority of Christianity. I showed them the superiority, and they had nothing to be afraid of when they challenged other views, or when they were challenged by their views. They had nothing to be afraid of because they could not be pushed off the cliff because they were right up against a solid rock. And so all four of my kids now are defenders of the faith and confident of their faith, and raising little defenders of the faith now, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. Now, I was saying that our culture, it lies to us about who we are and where we came from and what the world is. And I'll give you an example. Now, this is an older example, but in the year 2000, George Clooney starred in a movie called The Perfect Storm. Did any of you see that? He was out in a fishing boat, and two huge, massive storms converged, and he was right in the middle of them, and it was called The Perfect Storm because they hit each other, and it couldn't have been a worse situation, and the ship was incredibly going up and down, waves, think it's going to flip over any second. And I was watching the movie, and I realized, I said to my wife, I hit the pause button, I said, do you realize they never once prayed? They never once said, oh my God, we're going to die. God, have mercy on us. Never once. They were always saying, well, let's do this, fighting and talking and discussing. But they never mentioned God as though he didn't even exist. And if God existed, he was totally irrelevant and unable to do anything, and they didn't even think about him. And is this true reality? This is a lie. This is not real life, because just recently, I got the notes here so I wouldn't forget it. It was a plane crash in the Hudson River about a year ago, if you remember that. And the pilot was a hero because the plane's engine, he hit some geese, Canadian geese, and he's flying, the engines quit, and down he goes. Oh, and what are we going to do? He hits the Hudson River, and he coasted into that river, and everybody lived. And when they interviewed the people and said, what did you do on the planes? What was everybody's attitude? Guess what they said? We cried out to God. We prayed. Oh, God, save us. It's not like Hollywood said. Hollywood lies because it shows here a ship crashing and nobody is praying. Nobody's saying, is there a priest to hear my confession? Please, is there a priest in the room? They were all going down, and they had no thought of eternity, no thought of where they're going after life, if there's heaven or hell, or if they're just going to evaporate, or what's going to happen. No concept of God or a final hereafter. And that is dishonest because it is a movie that will not discuss God. It is a modern movie that goes along with the flow. And in a sense, it betrays reality, because when you really see an accident like that, like in the Hudson River, the people there cried out to God, and they were looking for eternity and praying that God would save them. What a difference, huh? The real world, all of us, even though right now you take people out in Australia, many of them are if not atheists in a theoretical way, atheists in a practical way. They don't think of God. They don't care about God. Like my younger brother, he told me one time he went to the movies. Every day he went out to the theaters, and he had abandoned Christianity. He'd become a hedonist in many ways, an agnostic. And I said to him, why do you go to movies every night? He said, because I know that life is meaningless, there is no God, and I go to movies every night to distract myself. I don't want to think about it. Life is absurd and meaningless, and I go to movies to distract myself, to play out the game as long as I'm alive. And this is what people do today. People today in the modern world, in America and Australia and in Europe and many other places. Now, the rest of the world is very religious in many ways, but the Western world has lost it in great degree. And we entertain ourselves. Sports and movies and all kinds. It's an entertainment society like back in Rome when they built the Colosseum. They entertain people to keep them pacified, to keep them busy, and people go to movies and do all of these things because if you force one of these people to sit alone in a room with nobody to talk to them, no movies on, no sports on, and they have to just be alone and think for an hour, they'd go crazy. People don't know how to do that, and they would have to start thinking about questions like, who am I and why am I here? And then they want to get distracted again. And the people in the modern world are so busy distracting themselves, they're going to come to the end of their life, and they're not going to know who they are, why they're here, and they've never asked the questions. It's like getting in a car and starting to drive, and I'm driving all over seeing beautiful things, but I have no idea where I'm going or where I'm going to get there and what's going to happen when I get there. You've got to first say, where am I going? And let's see the map. And it's something about what's the purpose of this. You don't just get into a car and drive to nowhere for no purpose. So there are many views of religion. One of the things when I began to do this search, I said to myself, oh my goodness, how am I going to figure this all out? There's Buddhism, Hinduism, Shintoism, Islam, Christianity, and within Christianity you have 35,000 different denominations. You have Baptists, Lutherans, you've got all of the atheists, agnostics, pantheists, materialists, humanists. How do I know what's the best way? Am I going to have enough time in my whole life to study all these things, even to try to come to an idea? And if I do eventually come to an idea of what is true, and I say this is true with a capital T, do you know what happens if you walk out into the street and say, I have the truth? In America and in the modern world, is there such a thing as truth? If you say that there is such a thing as objective truth and I have the truth, I'm convinced of it and I know it, you're going to be considered, I made a list here, you're going to be odd, exclusive, and elitist, narrow-minded, but more than anything else, stupid. Everybody in the modern world knows there's no objective truth. Everybody in the modern world knows there's nothing that is true. What's true for you is good for you, and what's true for me is true for me. Don't ever tell anybody that you know the truth if you want to be considered a normal person in society. 100 years ago, you could say there was truth, but during the whole philosophy in the 60s came along, and if you remember, even the Beatles and those before them used to sing songs about what truth was, about heaven, and is there a God? They were searching in the 60s and the 70s. They were asking the big questions, who are we? You go back and listen to early rock music and a lot of these first songs. They were asking questions, trying to figure out what life is about and so on, and pretty soon they came to the conclusion there was none. And John Lennon sings, think if there is no heaven, it's not hard to do. I'm not going to sing it for you. I don't remember it all. And then they gave up the idea that there was such a thing as truth. Everything became relative. It was all up to us. There was nothing that we could find that we could hang on to and say this is the truth. There were truths with a small t. 2 plus 2 is 4. That's a truth. There are truths out there, but there is not truth with a capital T, something that is objective, that imposes itself upon you. And so that became something, if you ever said that there was, then you were a nut. You were exclusive. I remember I gave a talk on Peter and the primacy one time and how God gave the church, and then the church was given Peter and the primacy of Rome. And I was talking about this, and a religious education director for a whole diocese in the United States came up to me afterwards and says, you are an elitist. Because I said there was such a thing as truth and that Jesus appointed a man to be in charge of his church. I was an elitist, narrow-minded. Well, where do we begin? The real questions of philosophy, and I'm not a philosopher, like I said, I'm a street philosopher, I'm just a practical guy. But we begin with the question, does anything exist? And if it exists, why does it exist? One of the things we're faced with, the truth that we're faced with, is there is an objective reality out there. If you don't think so, then try to go through the wall when you leave instead of the door. Now, there are a lot of philosophers who are existentialists or nihilists or anarchists who try to resist the objective reality that's out there. They want to deny it and say this is all just a dream world. It's all an illusion. It's not really there. And I always say that when you leave this room, I want you to go out through the wall and not out through the door. And they don't do it, because they're forced to admit that there is a real world out there. There is a real objective reality that imposes itself upon us. And so then we say, okay, there is something out there. There is something. I am something, and you're something, and this is something. And so we have to deal with the fact that something is there. Then you say, how did it get here, and why is it here? The number one question of philosophy is, why does anything exist? Because even if you admit it exists, then the big question in philosophy is, why does it exist? Why do people exist? Why are there stars and moon and earth? And why is there love and hate and war and food and all these things? Why do they exist? So these are the big questions, and it boils down basically to, is there a being that created it all? Or is there not a being that created it all? It all boils down to those two simple things. Either everything has a personal beginning by a creator, an artist, whatever you want to call him, or everything got here by chance. Something has to be eternal because something has to exist forever. Our minds can't even comprehend something not existing forever. So you either have to say there was a designer who existed forever and then created and made something physical, or you have to say that everything physical already was eternal and has been here from the beginning, and all that you and I are is an accident or a random chance plus time plus matter. A random accident. A complex chemical machine or something like this. You really have these two. But we're going to get to that more in just a minute. Now, I'm going to give two examples of this. The Gospel of John and the Gospel of Paul Gauguin, the French painter. St. John wrote a gospel around 100 AD, and in it he claims that the world has a purpose, that there's a God outside who created. In fact, that God who outside, he became flesh and came down to earth, and he died for us, and he was involved in the world. And that the world is actually a piece of art. It is a creation made by a person who is infinite and personal. An infinite personal being or artist created all of this, and therefore it's here. Therefore, you and I have purpose and meaning, and John goes on in this beautiful thing called the gospel. The gospel means good news, and he's telling you the good news that life has meaning. There is a God, and he's not a bad God. He's a good God. He loves us. He wants the best for us, and he's telling us this whole story. Now, in the 1900s, Paul Gauguin wrote a different gospel. The modern world had come in now, and it's not fashionable to be Christians and to believe John's gospel. So Paul Gauguin, the painter in France, wrote another one. He went to Tahiti, which isn't far from here. We flew over it on the way down here. And by the way, I never will call this the down under again. I'm going to call it the way down under. That plane was a long flight down here. So we went by Tahiti, and when I flew over and I looked on the map that we're not far from Tahiti, I thought of Paul Gauguin when he went there, and he made a painting. And his painting was called What, Whence, and Whither. I don't know if you've ever heard about it or seen it. I wish I had a big illustration of it here. I don't. It is about 20 feet long, and it's about 8 feet high, and it covers a whole wall. And it is a picture of the natives in Tahiti. But he calls it What, Whence, and Whither. And to make sure you don't miss the title, he painted the title right on the painting so you would make sure to know that you didn't miss it. And then he wrote I have an interview that he gave at home in my books. I have an interview that he gave explaining this painting. It's very interesting. He said that it is a gospel equivalent to the Gospels of the Bible. He made that statement, that my painting is a gospel. It is a philosophical statement about life equal to the Gospels of the Bible. So what does this painting tell us? It starts from left to right. We read from we read from left to right. I'm sorry. His is from right to left because it was Oriental and you read backwards. John the Apostle in his gospel told those three. Where do we come from? From a creator who made us in his image. What are we? We're human beings with value and purpose and meaning that can love and communicate, and it's not an illusion because we're made in the image of the one who created us. And where are we going? Back to the one who created us. Since we're in his image, we will spend all of eternity back being raised right up into the life of this God who created us. John tells us this. Gauguin says, no, I don't agree with this. I have a new gospel. I want to be liberated from that God because that God tells me I have to do certain things and I can't do other things. And I don't want this kind of God to impose himself upon me with his morality. So I have come up with a new gospel, and I think my new gospel is correct, and the Western world tends to agree with him. And so you have what went with it, the three big questions, and what does it start with? It starts with a dog sleeping on the ground. And the point is that we really don't know where we came from, because you're reading it from the beginning. Where does it come from? There's some trees and animals and a dog. We come from the animals. We come from evolution. There's no real beginning. There's nothing there like a burst of light or a god or a creator or a painter. There's a dog. And then you have a beautiful young woman. And then you come along to another one that's standing. They're looking up like this. And what it says there, he said, this woman is questioning her destiny. She's saying, who am I? Where do I come from? What am I? And then there's another looking at her saying, you have no right to even ask that question. Who are you to dare to ask that question? And then as you go through the painting, there's a younger woman leaning this way, and then there's an old woman, all brown skin and wrinkled and dying. Where do we come from? What are we? And where do we go? We go to death. There is we don't know. We just know that we die. And then the last thing on the painting at the end, there's a white bird, and he said it's a stupid white bird that represents the futility of language. You can't even ask the question, really. He contradicts himself. He asks the questions trying to answer, but he ends with a stupid white bird that represents the irrationality and ineffectiveness of language to even ask. What's his gospel promise us? Is this the gospel of good news? Is this the gospel that gives us hope and meaning to life? When I wake up in the morning, I say I have purpose and value because I just looked at Gauguin's painting. No, it gives me nothing but despair. It gives me nothing but hopelessness. There is no meaning. I don't know where I come from. I do not know who I am. I do not know where I'm going. And in fact, it's a futile thing to even ask because there are no answers to that question. And during his time, the existentialist philosophers, they came along and they said, life is absurd. Life has no meaning. Every day you have to get up and you have to create meaning for yourself that day. So you have to, and existentials means at the moment. At this existential moment, you wake up in the morning. I feel like I'm important, but I know it's a lie because I don't know where I come from, I don't know who I am, and I don't know where I'm going, and basically there's no purpose or meaning in life. I'm on a planet spinning around the sun, and someday the sun's going to burn up, and when the sun burns up, the earth is going to blow up with it, and it may be 1 billion years from now, but it's all going to be over, so what does it matter? So what do I do today when I wake up in the morning? I'm the atheist, I'm the existentialist. What do I do in the morning? I could do one of two things. I can commit suicide or just be a hedonist and eat, drink, and be merry and drink and get drunk and have sex and whatever I want. Or go to the movies every day. Or I can get up and say, everything inside of me screams that I do have meaning. That I should love and that I should be loved. That I should communicate with people and do what is right. But I have no basis for it. But I'm going to go out and play the game today. I'm going to live the lie and I'm going to act and create meaning for myself so I can get through the day. This is what too many in the modern world do. This is why I reject the modern world. It's why I'm a Christian. And it's not because I caught it like the measles. It's because I've thought about it. And I've decided one is superior to the other. So you have these two Gospels of John and of Gauguin. Now to being a detective. We have a whole array of confusing alternatives. Atheism, what does it mean? In Greek, theos is God. When you put an A on the front of it, it means no. No God. An atheist is one who believes there is no God. I don't think it's very easy to be an atheist because you can't prove there's no God. You may believe there's no God, but certainly you can't prove it. I think it takes more faith to believe what an atheist believes than it does what a Christian believes. They say, we're the people of faith. You believe it all by faith. Oh, really? What do you believe? You believe there's no God, and you believe you have importance or value in your life. What basis do you have? Oh, we're reason. No, it's not reason, because you cannot prove there's no God, nor can you prove any of this. You believe it by faith, and it takes a lot more faith to believe what you do than it takes for what I believe. I am not the faith person. They're the faith person. So you've got atheism, which means no God, or you've got agnosticism. The word knowledge comes from the Greek word gnosis. And then when you have again means no, agnostos means no knowledge. So an agnostic is one who doesn't know. An agnostic says, I don't think there's a God, but I don't know, and I can't prove it, and I'm just going to live my life as though I don't know. I'm not even going to try. We can't be certain of anything. How can we prove anything? Can you get your microscope out and prove there is a God or not a God, or the world was created or got here by chance or in a big bang? We don't know, so I'm an agnostic. I'm just going to go on with my life. You have, under that atheism or agnostic, you have existentialism, you have Marxism, you have materialism, which says that everything is just matter. There's no spirit. Everything is matter. Everything is physical. Everything can be tested with a microscope. You have nihilism, which just says, I'm the center. Everything is a waste. This is where the anarchists come from. And humanism, which says, well, since we don't believe or know there's a God, then we're the center of all things, because obviously we're the most advanced creature on the earth, so we'll be in charge, and we'll say that the human being is the center of all things. We'll become humanists. Then you've got pantheism, which is another alternative. And pantheism comes from the word pan, which means everything, all, is God. Theo is God. So everything is God. Instead of saying that there's a God outside, and he created a universe, and they're distinct. And when you go to see Michelangelo's painting in the Sistine Chapel, when you see the creation, Michelangelo was very smart, because when he painted the creation, he doesn't have God and Adam's fingers touching. If they were touching, you could say Adam was an extension of God. God just extended himself somehow, therefore all of us are God, and the earth is God, and we're all just an extension of him. But Michelangelo was smart enough to know that when God created the heavens and the earth, it wasn't an extension of himself. He wouldn't touch the fingers. Adam was a creation outside of and separate from God. But pantheism says that everything is God. You're God, I'm God. The earth is God. The Hindus believe the cows are God, therefore you don't kill them and eat them. The mice eat a third, the rats and the mice eat a third of the grain in India while people starve, but you can't kill those rats and mice because they're God. They're part of God too. How can you kill them? See, and when you have a pantheistic view, that's one other possible view, and in there you've got Hinduism, Buddhism, the New Age movement is there, but also the new ecological movements, those that claim that we have to protect Mother Earth, and we do, and Christians of all should be good stewards of the earth and of the earth's resources, but not to the point that she's Mother Earth, that she's God, and somehow we have to this whole idea. And believe me, this is going to become the new tyranny in our modern age, is this whole ecological movement where the earth and the grass and the animals are going to become more important than the human beings. And it'll come to the point where you can't kill these animals, you can't do this, because they have rights too. That kangaroo is a person too. And then it'll come to the point where don't you dare step on the grass, because the grass is living, and who are you to dare step on a living thing? And this new ecological movement that makes the earth God, that makes it divine, and then all of a sudden you become the enemy, and the earth and the animals and the trees all become more important than us. And don't think it's not happening. You can see what's going on in America, and I'll bet my boots it's happening here too. And it will only get worse. So this is all pantheism, which is another possibility. And then you've got dualism, which says that ultimately, in the end, there's two powers, one that is good and one that is evil, and they balance each other out. Neither one is stronger or better than the other. The evil one, yin, and the positive, or the bad one, yang, they balance each other. It's kind of like Japanese and some of these Eastern religions. And they balance each other out. And so what should you be, good or bad? It doesn't matter, because they're equal. There's no way to distinguish between what is good and evil. They're balancing each other out. This is called a dualism. That's another idea. And then you've got theism, and I could go on and on. Then there's another one called theism, which believes that there is a God. Theo means God. A belief that there is a God. And in those two, you have many categories, but mainly when you come down to monotheism, you have Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which, by the way, is more than 1/2 of the world's population. More than 1/2 of the world's population believes that there is one God who created everything and is in charge of everything. So we're in a good company, actually, because over half the world's population believes this. Within Christianity, you have basically 2 billion Christians, the largest religion in the world, 1 billion of them Catholic and 1 billion of them other traditions or denominations. And then with Islam, you have 1 billion. And with Jews, how many Jews do you think there are? Only 13 million. In the whole world, there's only 13 million Jews. But these three together make up more than half of the world's population. Now, detectives like Sherlock Holmes and others, their job is to get to the bottom of things, to get to the core issues, to simplify things. All of this room full of evidence. Okay, what are we going to do? We're going to catalog the evidence. We're going to get rid of the evidence that is superficial or tangential, not important. We're going to get right to the heart of things. We want to have the evidence and the things that are the most important, and we want to put them in as few categories as possible. And so that's what a detective does, is solves problems, figures out puzzles. And we are faced with a mystery and a puzzle, because if you were, let's look at our lives this way. Let's imagine that you all by yourself were dropped onto a strange planet that you had never been to before, and you woke up one morning and found yourself on this strange planet with purple trees and green, yellow water or whatever, totally different. And all of a sudden you're there alone. And you start walking around and looking. And you say, it's really here. This is here. It's not a dream. I've been dropped on this strange planet. Where am I? What am I here for? Who made this? Where did it come from? Where does it exist in the galaxy? All of a sudden, you're filled with questions. Now, why don't you ask those questions this morning when you woke up? You're already on a strange planet. You're already on a piece of matter that's spinning around in a solar system around the sun. Are we alone? This is what you're going to ask on this other planet that has yellow water and blue trees. Am I alone? Is there anybody else out there? Hello, is there anybody out there? Either on this planet or up beyond the green clouds. Am I alone? How did I get here? How many of you asked that question this morning when you got up? When you realized that you were on this crazy planet, a spaceship spinning around the sun that's eventually going to burn up someday when the sun explodes. But we don't think that way. Most of you don't, because you're Catholics or you're Christians and you already understand why you're here. But what about the person out on the street that doesn't know, that never asked that question? Why don't they stop, instead of watching football all the time and drinking beer, and stop? You know something? Before I just get to the end of my life, I ought to ask myself why I'm here, if there's any meaning to me being here. You know, there's a song, I love it, this guy sang it. He says, I grew up and I went to school and I got through grade school and I got that over with. And he said, then I went up to college, and he said, I worked really hard and drank beer and got in trouble. Got pretty good grades, and he said, I graduated and I got that over with. That's finally, I got that over with. He said, then I found a pretty girl and I married her and I got that over with. And then we had kids and we raised them and they grew up and we sent them to college, and then I got that over with. And then he said, then I finished my job, I worked hard and I retired and got that over with. And then I sat out on the park bench in my backyard and I said, wait a minute, there's got to be more to life than that. Just getting everything over with. Now what? And all of a sudden he stopped to ask himself, what is the meaning of all of this that I've gone through in my life? But why don't we think about this as we're spinning around on a planet that's going to blow up someday? Why are we here? How did this planet get here? Why is it spinning around the sun? Is it all a matter of chance plus time plus matter? Do I have meaning? Am I alone? Where do I come from? Where am I going? What's the meaning of all of this? There are 3 possibilities. I think the good detective brings it down to 3 possibilities. First of all, that there's nothing. Everything started from nothing, nothing. It's like as if you have a blackboard and you erased it all and there's nothing there. Everything came from nothing. Nobody can accept that idea because everybody knows that something has had to have been there before. Something had to exist beyond. Even if you try to comprehend something not existing, you say, okay, I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning. I'm going to build a wall, and nothing existed beyond this point, except if I crawl over the wall, I can keep going. So something was even beyond that wall. Can you imagine, even with your finite mind, there ever being something that did not exist all the way back or all the way into the future? If it's all like contained inside of a big bubble, then okay, what happens if I go outside the bubble? So the human mind can't even comprehend of things not existing or being eternal. So the possibility that everything came from nothing, nothing was there is not a possibility. So we're then down to 2, the detective says. Sherlock Holmes says with his magnifying glass. I put all the evidence down to 2. I've simplified the puzzle to 2 questions. Everything either came here from an impersonal beginning, or it came here and existed because of a personal beginning. A personal or an impersonal beginning. In other words, it was either begun something, the thing that existed forever is a being, an infinite personal being, or it is time plus chance plus matter and energy. Those are really the only 2 possibilities. You can juggle and shuffle all you want, but it comes down to basically those 2. And if it's those 2, then you have to ask yourself, which one answers the big questions that I'm faced with every day as I look out from my planet with green clouds and yellow water and ask myself, why am I here? Which one of those 2 answers the big questions? Which one takes the most faith to believe in? And which one can I live consistently with on a daily basis? Which one can I live consistently with on a daily basis? And then we have some clues. We've got the evidence, then we're going to look for some clues since we're the detective. So what are the clues that we have? Well, I would say that you have 2 clues. One is the objective and orderly universe that is around us, that we have to face is really here, and we have to live with that reality. And again, if you don't think so, walk through the door through the wall instead of the door. There is a universe out here. There's such a thing as gravity that holds you down. There's a lot of laws. It's a universe. And there's an order to the universe. And the more scientists discover about the universe, the more amazed they are with the intricacies and the detail and the minutia of how it all works. They are not digging deeper and deeper and finding nothing but chance. They are finding designs and things that are incredible that we can't even comprehend. So we have the clue, the first clue of the orderly, objective reality of the universe around us. And the second clue that we have, I call it the uniqueness of mankind. There is something different about us than anything else. I am not the same as a tree or a rock. I too am made up of chemicals and molecules and atoms, but I'm different than a rock in the sense that I have capability to be personal. I have the capability to love, and even different than the animals, I have the capability to have abstract thought, to consider what's going to happen to me in the future, to ask questions like where I came from. I have the ability to love. I have the ability, and by the way, if I say that this is all just chemicals and hormones, that I really don't have something called personality, that I really have the capability to love, and it's something more than just chemicals and hormones, then I can prove that there's some big problem with that, because if I go to my wife tonight and I have romantic ideas for her tonight, and I say to her, I'm having a hormonal chemical reaction for you, do you think I'm going to get the response I want? I am not. Because what I'm feeling for her and what I'm expecting her to feel for me is more than chemicals and hormones and electronics. It's something that is above and transcends all of that, called real personal relationship and love. And I can go on. We have the ability to think rationally and abstractly and to communicate. We have the ability to create, and on and on and on. So there's something unique. The 2 clues. We have the objective universe that we have to deal with, and we have what I call the mannishness of man with a capital N, mankind. Those 2 things. And Paul discusses those in the book of Romans. It shows you how modern the Bible is. You think it's an old book, old-fashioned. No, it's not. The Bible is the most modern book ever written. So the results are, if there is no God, you have chaos, meaninglessness, loneliness, despair, silence, fear, alienation, angst, purposeless hedonism, and desperation. What a recipe for a happy life. On the other side, if we view that there is a personal being who created it all, you have answers to live consistently by. You have confidence, knowledge, peace, meaning, immortality, real love, order in the universe and in our life, and joy. Now, which world do you want to live in? The world of the atheist or the world of the theist? Which one can you live consistently with? Which one can you live consistently? If you are the atheist and you have all of this, then why do you get up in the morning and act as though you have purpose and meaning when you know it's a lie? Why do you treat people with value when you know they aren't valuable? You eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. And St. Paul knew that because he wrote that in 1 Corinthians. If there is no immortality, if there's no God, if there's no resurrection from the dead, then why the hell are you doing all this? Why are you so stupid to be controlling your life and living and controlling your appetites? For heaven's sakes, if it's not true, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. You're going to be eaten by worms, and that's the end. Worm food is your end. And if that's all there is, then go out and live it up and get it over with and enjoy every minute of it. And why do you think in our culture we have so many people that live this way? Drug addicts and hedonists and people who they're living out their philosophy. We put them in jail. Why? For being consistent with what they're taught in school. They'll go out and live it up. There's no God. Do whatever you want. And then they do it and we put them in jail. They ought to win an award. They're the only ones living consistent with this atheistic position. We're the ones that should be penalized for living contrary to it. Now you know why I'm a Christian and why I'm a Catholic. All right. I know I'm going over. I'm almost done here. I only have 6 pages to go. No, I'm just kidding. I do if you count what I'm going to do after Mass about talking to non-Catholics. But anyway, now, we talked now about the natural revelation of God. The revelation of God that you see in nature, in the universe, and in our own unique mannishness. See, without even really talking about the Bible. I never quoted the Bible at any of this point, but you already saw that by looking at what God has created, you can see there's something there. There's more purpose and meaning in the fact that God created it all. We know who we are. Now, let's say we're on that planet again. Okay, the one with the green sky and yellow water and the strange place, and you're asking, who am I? Why am I here? What is this? And you're looking around and you find a piece of paper that's been ripped in half, and there's words on it, but it's only a small section. It's only like 2 inches of a page, and you know there's got to be something else that was ripped and it's gone, and so you can't read it. You can see words. You can see it's trying to tell you something, and it's legible, but you don't know what it is because the rest of it's been torn and it's gone. This is like looking at the natural revelation God gives us. We see His divine nature in the world. We see the mannishness of man, our ability to love and to have meaning and purpose and all. It's like that half of a page, but we can't read it all. And we see there's something there. There's got to be meaning and purpose to life because look at what I can see, but I don't know what it all is. And so you go looking for it. And then all of a sudden, guess what? The detective finds the other half of the page. And you put it together, and the tear line matches perfectly. And now you can read, and it tells you who you are and why you're here and all about the purpose of life. This is what I would call the first half was the natural revelation of God, that which you can see through His creation. But now God has gone beyond that because of His love for us, and because of sin the world was kind of quarantined off. And then He now gives us what we call divine revelation, where He Himself, an alien from outer space, He's not from around here. He imposes Himself into our existence, and He explains things to us because of His love and His mercy. He explains to us who we are. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And He made man in His image, male and female. And then you go on in Scripture and in tradition, and you have now the divine revelation, which matches perfectly the two ripped pieces of paper. Natural revelation and divine revelation, they meet together perfectly. And now all of a sudden you look at the two and you can understand who we are and where we came from. And it makes all kinds of sense. Because an alien has arrived on the planet to give us the other side of the story. And this is what we have in the scriptures and in the tradition of the church and the teaching of the apostles, but mainly when God spoke through the prophets and revealed things about himself and the world and us, and then he spoke through his Son. The ultimate word is through his Son, Jesus Christ. All of that then, it shows us the purpose and meaning of life. I am a Christian today, not because I need a crutch. I am not a Christian today because it makes me happy and I want to go to heaven. It is much deeper than that. I am a Christian today because I believe it is ultimately the explanation of reality. And nobody else can live consistent in this reality apart from being a Christian. What do I mean by that? Well, we already talked about the atheist cannot live consistent because he thinks he has no meaning and yet he acts as though he does. But the yin and the yang can't live consistently. Neither can the pantheist. None of these other philosophies or religions can live consistent. Christianity, the revealed revelation of God that's contained in the Old and New Testament and taught in the church, this is the reality that explains. It is the philosophy that you can live completely consistently with. Any other ones, you have to live inconsistent. Just like the man that has a sign, no rules, he can't live consistent with that. I can live 100% consistent with my philosophy because I know that I am both holy, made in the image of God, that I've also fallen because of sin, and I'm marred, and I'm bent and defaced in a way. And I can explain mankind and why there's evil and why there's good and why there's sickness and why there's disease and why there's joy and happiness and love and children. Everything of life, it can explain it in the context of Christian philosophy. I am a Christian not because I want to be, and it isn't true because I believe it. I believe it because it's true. And this is the way I want to raise my kids, and this is the way I want the world to be, and it's our job, and that's what we're going to talk about after Mass, is talking to other people, to sharing this good news, especially to non-Catholics, and to Catholics as well, because there's too many Catholics that don't have a clue themselves. That's one of the things I found when I came into the Catholic Church. I came in, oh, these people have all this information, all these wonderful saints, and they know everything, they understand all of this, and I sat there in the pews and said, most of these people don't have a clue. Boy, do we have our work cut out for us. But anyway, we'll start with this point that there is a God, that it's the only position that gives purpose and meaning to life. Thank God that you believe these things. Make sure that you tell everybody else, because the world is crazy to learn them. It's dying. It's desperate. It has no hope. And you are the ones with the answer, with the key. Go out and open the door for them. You know, people joke around that ever since Steve Ray became a Catholic, he never opened a Bible again, which is true. Because now I have it all on my iPhone. And if this works, I'm going to read. Yep, here we go. I have 15 translations of the Bible on here with Greek and Hebrew dictionaries and the Catechism and everything else. Why would I carry around a whole big box of books with me when I travel when I can all do it here? Why open a Bible when I can have 5 or 10 versions and compare them with each other right on the screen? Okay, so here's what Paul says. Paul sees these clues. He's saying that there are people out there who are denying God. They're not believing these things. Instead of looking to God, they're looking to the animals and worshiping creatures and idols. And he says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of men who by their wickedness, they suppress the truth. They don't want to think about the truth. They don't want to acknowledge the truth that there's a God who's imposing some form of morality on me, and they want to ignore this, and so they go out and do their own things. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, his eternal power and deity has been clearly perceived in the things that have been made. Just like my 7-year-old daughter said, I see those things that are out there. They had to be made. Somebody created those things. So they are without excuse, Paul says. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God nor give thanks, but became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. And if that's not an explanation of modern Western world, I don't know what is. But there's a word there that's used that we see. It says that you could see the divine nature and the power of God through that which has been made. the universe out there, the objective universe that we see every day, that which has been made. But you know, in the Greek, if you were reading that in the original, the way Paul wrote it, the 5 English words, that which has been made, are a translation of one Greek word, which is poema. Poem. You can see something of God and understand something about God by reading his poem, that which he's made, his work of art. Something of him can be discerned and understood by the poetry that he wrote. You look out at the design, at the beauty, the power of the creation, of the universe, and you see the poema, the artwork of God. Like it says in Psalm 19, when David was out with his sheep looking up at the stars, asking these big questions, he said, "Behold, the heavens proclaim the glory of God, and the firmament declares the handiwork of his hands. Night to night pours forth speech, and day to day, but there's no sound, nothing is heard, and yet it all yells at you to say, look what God has done." So this Bible is the most modern book that's out there right now. It's more modern than the philosophers or anybody else because it goes all the way back. I like to say that the Bible, well, I'll get to that in a minute. I don't get ahead of myself. So it's the poema. By the way, the word poema in the Greek is only used 2 times in the New Testament. I love to do searches of words and say, because if that word poema is only used twice, you know it's significant, and it's each time it can tell you something. The other time it's used is in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, where it says that we are God's workmanship, created for good works. The word workmanship is poema. God has created 2 works of art, 2 poems that are read by the world. And by looking at these 2, we should be able to see something of God and know him. This is what I call the natural revelation. Not divine revelation where he speaks to us distinctly, but this is, we look at the creation, the natural revelation of God. And the one creation is his physical creation, which is his first poem. And the second one is the church. It is those who have been brought together in Christ, and they are now the church, and you are now his poem to be read by all men by the good works that you do. 2 great creations of God that the world should be able to look at and say, aha, of course, there's a God. Too often, the second creation is a bit flawed, but we're working at it. We're trying to be the church. We're trying to live holy before God, and I think that the world can see that that's there too. So having looked at the natural revelation, which I call the universe, and the uniqueness of mankind and our personality and our abilities to love and all of these other abstract thought and so on, those are the first clues. Now we come to a second one, which I would call, it is the, first of all, before I do that, I want to go to a chart that I created. We'll get to that in a minute. I made this chart for my kids, and it was, you are a detective. And what I did is I put those 2 side by side. If a God created, let's don't even call him a God. If an artist or a designer designed all of this and brought it into existence, what we are living, including myself and the trees and the rocks and the animals and the kangaroos. And by the way, yesterday I saw kangaroos. That was so cool. You know, when you think of Australia from where I live, you think first of all kangaroos. And I wanted to see a kangaroo in the worst way. And we drove to Canberra yesterday and back, and they're hopping through the field, and I even got out of the car and chased them through the field and got videos of them. Oh, my grandkids love it, and I loved it, and Janet was like a little kid. Anyway, so all of these things in the creation, and we're going to go see wombats and all those things tomorrow. So I told my wife when I grow up, when I got married, I told her that even when I get old, I'm never going to grow up. I'm going to stay a kid my whole life, you know. So I'm working at it. But if you take these 2 opposing views, a personal beginning and an impersonal beginning, let's just compare them and let's see which one works. If these are the 2 big possibilities that everything came up from an impersonal or a personal beginning, let's see which one works, which one answers the questions, which one is satisfying, and which one it takes the most faith to believe in. Okay, so first of all, we have on this side matter or energy or motion. All of these things are eternal, and Carl Sagan, I don't know if you remember him, kind of the pop scientist, who, what I didn't like about Carl Sagan is he was a good scientist studying stars and matter, and then he'd step over here and he would presume to be a philosopher. He had no right to be a philosopher. He had a right to be a scientist, but not a philosopher. And when he makes statements like the one I'm going to read to you, it is not science, it is philosophy and religion. His book, The Cosmos, begins with a statement: the universe is all there ever was, is, or will be. That is not a scientific statement because he can't prove any of that. It is a statement of faith. It is a statement of belief. It is a statement of philosophy or religion. It is not a statement of science. He steps from the scientific podium and he goes over here to the philosophical religious podium and makes a statement he does not have the authority to make. But he claims that the universe is all there ever was, is, or will be, and that excludes anything outside being a God or a creator. You are in a closed system, like in a bubble, and there's nothing outside of it. You are stuck in here, and this is all there is, and you better get used to it. And that's what his perspective is. On the other side, we have the Bible and Christianity and the best and brightest minds of human history that say, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There's something beside just the physical universe. In fact, there's the idea that God is outside. He's an eternal spiritual being, and he created creation, which is like a bubble, and inside of the bubble is space and time. But he's outside of space and time. We're inside of space and time. Carl Sagan says all there is the bubble, with no explanation of how it got here, where it came from, or what it's for. The theist position, the personal beginning, says, yes, there is a bubble. We have the same idea. There is a bubble, space and time, but outside the bubble, there is something that created or instigated the whole thing that gives purpose and meaning to everything inside of the bubble. Then you come to the universe and man. That's the beginning. What about the universe and man? The universe and man come from a combination of this. It's all random accident. Time plus chance plus matter. Randomness, accident, chance. And then we equals the universe and you. You are here by an accident from this point. You are here just because of the collision of certain chemicals and atoms and molecules over time. And chance and random chance formed you into what you are. Doesn't that give you great sense of purpose and meaning in life? You crawled out of the slime because chance accidentally collided molecules, and pretty soon you now are a very complicated molecular structure. On the other side, it says that God, the creator of the universe, is personal, infinite, intelligent, and creative. And he created all of this by an act of his will because of his love. I like to see it as God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the Trinity. They like each other so much. They're having such a great time in heaven, loving each other and just enjoying everything. They said, oh, this is so much fun. We have to create other beings to share this with us. When I travel with my wife, the first thing we got to do is, we would love to bring the grandkids and show them all of this. When you have things and enjoy things, it's all more meaningful when you can share it with someone else. And God, the Holy Spirit, the Trinity, and the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, they said, this is so wonderful. We're having so much fun up here liking each other, and we should create and have someone to share all this with so they can enjoy all of this too. And he created us. Now, which one gives you the most meaning to life? Which one takes the most faith to believe that you're all here by a random collision of molecules and chemicals, and now you're a very complex chemical hormonal machine, a cog in a bigger wheel, or that there's a personal, infinite, intelligent, creative being who created you in his image so that you could share the joy that he has from all of time? Then what is man? Man is, on this side, he is a product of chance, a cosmic accident. And, by the way, I should say this, Francis Bacon on the earlier one, he was a very brilliant British painter, said, man now realizes that he is an accident, a completely futile being. Francis Bacon, one of the great painters of the 20th century in England, and this is typical of philosophers and artists. Man now realizes he is an accident, completely futile being, and he painted a picture of the Pope, and he made the Pope look like a slab of steak, like meat. And his point was that all you are is a piece of meat. Now, what is mankind? A product of chance, a cosmic accident? Supreme Court Justice of the United States, Oliver Wendell Holmes, said man is no different than a baboon or a grain of sand, ultimately. We're no different than a baboon or a grain of sand, because once you take apart the fact that there is a personal, infinite God who created us in his image, we are nothing but an animal. And we're the animal that causes the problems. The kangaroos don't cause oil spills in the Gulf Coast off Mexico and Texas. It's us, the bad animals, that do this. See, so this is the way it's going to be perceived as we go on. If we are just animals, we're the bad animals. We're the ones that pollute. We're the ones that cause chaos. The kangaroos and wombats don't do this. But if you see it from God's perspective, from the other side that there's a God, man made in the image and likeness of an existing God, he's personal, verbalizing, able to love, create, and infinitely valuable. And which one gives you the more purpose in life? Which one do you actually get up in the morning and feel like? Of course you feel like the one who's created in the image of God, who has the ability to love and to verbalize and to create and has meaning and purpose to life. You're not just a mistake, not just a chemical compound. And what does man live by? If there is no God, if everything is by chance, then what's the basis for morals? What's the basis for doing what is good or bad or right or wrong? Or can you even say there is such a thing as good or bad or right or wrong? Because who sets the standards and where do they come from if everything is by chance? Everything is arbitrary. Everything is relative. That's why I said earlier, if you go out and say that you know the truth, everybody's going to think you're stupid and a nut, because they know that everything is arbitrary and relative. This is what our world teaches and thinks today. That's how they live. Only in their mouth. They don't live it consistently, which we'll get to. In this view that there is no personal God, we come up with morals and law are based on statistical averages. 51% dominates. Hitler was right. If he could get 51%, who and on what basis would you say Hitler was wrong? If there's no God and no objective morality, if everything is by chance, then the might is right. The survival of the fittest. Hitler gets 51%, he is morally right. Who's to challenge that if there's no objective morality that's outside of us? Man is an ocean with no shoreline or North Star or Southern Cross. We saw that too. That was cool. We don't have that in Michigan. But on the other hand, if there is a personal designer and creator, absolutes on which to base morals and law, now we have an absolute reference point that there is a basis for morals and law and justice beyond just our own statistical averages or might is right or survival of the fittest. The individual is significant and important eternally. In other words, if you don't have a concept of a God, then people individually are not important. What's important is the collective, that you function to try and keep survival going. But if you have the position that God created us in his image, why in the Western world do we have the view that each one of us is significant and has value? Because we're still living off the capital of Christianity, which permeated our societies, both yours and mine and Canada's and England's and Europe. For the first hundreds of years, we had the idea that we were created in the image of God and that each of us had eternal value. Therefore, the collective could not squish the individual because the individual had importance too. And we are still living off the capital of Christianity. But wait until Christianity is completely removed from society and we're going to go back to totalitarian governments that don't have the concept that the individual person is right. And like Stalin and others said, I love humanity, it's people I can't stand. And then one or two more to compare. Life and the universe are ultimately meaningless and absurd. Without a reference point that is infinite, all that we are is absurd and meaningless, and eventually the earth is going to blow up and burn. And what does it matter? Because not only are your bones gone, but now so are your memories. Does that give you a great sense of hope? You wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm so glad to be alive because the meaning of the universe and life is meaningless and absurd and there's no reference point which I can draw meaning from. Charles Ives was a great American composer, and I have his music at home, if you can call it music. No answers to explain existence. He has a piece of music where it's quiet. You hear kind of like a din, a roar, way in the background of eternity. And then you hear a trumpet go, doo, 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 doo. And then silence. And then a little while later, the trumpet goes, doo, 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 and it's called silence. It's called, there is no answer. It's calling out. He says 3 times we call out, is there meaning out there? Is there any purpose? And there's no answer. The universe is silent. And he ends up with the music just dying down. There is no answer out there. The universe is silent. We're all alone. Man's feeling of importance is an illusion, a sick joke played on us by chance. Do you remember the song Dust in the Wind, a group called Kansas? All we are is dust in the wind. I'd like to sing the whole song for you, but I don't remember all of it, and you'd all leave. Ultimate, if there's no God and no personal beginning, everything ultimately ends in death, at the end of the solar system. All things, including man and his memory, will burn up with the solar system. Death for the individual, decay. What is right, there's nothing. On the other side of the fence you have, if there is a God, and ask me if this gives you more hope and the way you really feel as a human being in the morning. Even if you try to feel that other way, you can't. Because if man is just a machine and just chemicals, what purpose is there to get up in the morning? If I'm driving down the road and an elderly woman crosses the road, I have 2 options. I can either get out of my car and help her across the road, or I could run her over and rearrange her molecules. And who's to say which is better than the other? If she's in my way, why would I take the time to help her across the street, which inconveniences me? If everything might is right, and there is no base, well, I should just run her over and go on with my way, because what I want to do, might is right. What is right. I want to get over there and she's in my way. I'll rearrange the molecules. What makes her significant if there's no God? See, atheists get all this theoretical arguments, but bottom line is, what gives you meaning in life if there's no God? Why should you, the atheist, why should I treat you with respect? You have no basis for morals. You say there's no objective basis for morals, but I come up and stomp on your foot, and what do? Say, ouch, that's not fair, you shouldn't do that. Based on what? I was at an amusement park. 3-hour line to get to the roller coaster. I don't like lines. I hate lines. Way up ahead of me as it's winding through, I see a guy with a t-shirt that says, "No rules." If you know me, you know exactly what I did. I cut right through all the lines, I pushed him out of the way, and I stood right in front of him with all determination. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Read your t-shirt." I said, "There are no rules. I just took cuts. I don't like lines. Your t-shirt said it all. Thank you very much." "So you can't do that." I said, "Yes, I can. Your shirt says I can." "You can't do that," he says. "Oh, so you don't mean what your shirt says? Or those rules, that only applies to you and not to me?" I said, "I think I made my point. You have a stupid shirt." And I went back and got in my place in line. My poor wife, I embarrass her all the time with things like this. It's a good question, and I'm glad you brought that. If I get it right, there's 2. Why do I just say God is transcendent and not immanent in the creation as well? And why is it that we don't learn from other more primitive or simple cultures and societies where they have a great respect for nature and the world? And it's a very good point. And if I was off balance on that, I'm glad you give me the opportunity to be balanced about it. I think that when God created the world and the heavens and the earth, and he put Adam and Eve in charge, and he said to tend the garden, the word tend and take care of the garden means to care for his creation, not to exploit it, not to abuse it, but to use it rightly and with respect, and that is the case. I react in some ways because I see a culture now like mine, which is stopping progress and the ability to people to even use the land they have because there's a spotted turtle that lives on that land, and so the turtle becomes more important than the fact that the family needs a house and they need to build here and the guy has paid $1 million for the land. I react to the position that is making the ecological thing like a tyranny. And that is, I react to that. But on the other hand, we are very much, as Christians, more so than anyone else, obligated to take care and be good stewards of what God has given us. I am a father of a household, of a family, with a wife and children and grandchildren. I have to be a good steward of that gift that God has given me. I can't abuse my wife. I can't abuse my children. I can't exploit them, because God gave them to me as a steward to care for them. And the earth is also, we are stewards of the earth. It's there for our use. God gave it to us for our use, but not to exploit, not to abuse, and not to damage. And so we are those who should be like Adam and Eve, were to be caretakers of the garden, to tend the garden, to build, to have it grow and to be good. So I agree with you completely. We should be of all people the most. However, when I look at the government, they're doing it now. They're not doing it because of that view. They're doing it because of a very different view. Now, the other question is, a lot of times the simpler societies that do have a respect for the earth, they do so because they think the earth is divine, or they have this idea that the earth is God itself, or even more so important than they are. And a lot of times they may treat the earth respectfully, but not their own fellow human beings. I think of the American Indians, for example, who may treat the earth with more respect, and they would treat the buffalo with great respect, and they would treat the antelopes with great respect, but they'd go next door and scalp their neighbor and kill them and steal their wives. So you have, there's no such thing as the noble savage, I don't think. All of us are sinners and have failed in that. But we can learn. I would agree with you that all religions have elements of truth in them, whether they're Buddhist or Marxist or anything. There are elements of truth to some degree or more, and we can learn from all of those the good things without taking the bad things as well. Now, God being, is that fair enough? On that point, not being... As balance, exactly. It is, and balance is not always easy to get. Balance is not always easy to have, especially now when we have what's called multicultural societies, where we're coming at it from different philosophies and religion. Then balance is even harder to maintain at times. But then about the transcendence and the immanence of God, I agree completely that God is transcendent. He's other. He's spirit. He is not physical. He's created a physical world, but he is very much a part of this world, and he is everywhere at all the time. But that is not the same as Pantheism, saying that we are God, or that God is in this paper, or that the spark of the divine is in me and all I have to do is keep it lit and growing. That's the New Age movement. That's Pantheism. And so we're not saying that, and I know you're not either, but that God is a part of his creation in the sense that he is also here caring about it and concerned about it and involved in it. He's not the deist kind of a God. Deism is a God who creates and winds up the clock and then leaves and lets it run by itself. We don't believe that this God that we have is a deist. We believe in the God who's not only did he create it, but he's also very involved in it, and he cares. In fact, John 3:16, I'll close this question with this. The very first verse I learned as a child, was John 3:16. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believed in him would not perish but have everlasting life. And it wasn't until later in life I realized it didn't say, for God so loved our soul. It says, for God so loved the cosmos. The Greek word there is cosmos, the world, the universe. For God so loved what he created that he gave his only begotten Son, not only to redeem us from our sin, but to redeem the world from the curse of man's sin. Even God knows that the world is under a curse because of our sin. And the death of Jesus is not only to redeem us from our sins, but also to redeem the earth from the curse that was caused by our sins. Okay, yes?
Steve, just more of a practical question. In this country, secularism is on the rise, and the media essentially are atheistic in their outlook. Can you maybe flows into your next talk, but could you talk about the onus upon us as laity to know the basic arguments for and against atheism, and what responsibility we should take, and maybe recommend maybe 2 or 3 books that we...
Yes, I think it's absolutely incumbent upon us. It is our responsibility to know how to explain, not only for our own salvation and sanity, but for our families. I'm raising kids in this society. If you think it's secular and pagan here, getting that way, come to America. And I think that we're from Europe and America, it's flowing to the rest of the world in much degree. And so I have an incumbent upon me to save my children from this. I have a talk that I give called Raising Rebels. And people said, that's a terrible title for a talk. And I said, no, it's not. It's a very good title for a talk. I want to raise my children to be rebels against a pagan culture, to be rebels against sin. Every kid has in their nature a desire to rebel and to break free from their parents and well, I think that's a good thing. God built it into kids so that they can break off and become their own family and their own individuals apart from mom and dad. But we have to channel that rebellion, that desire, and we have to train them to become rebels against the culture of death and against. My son, when he was 16, went and bought his car, and he went out and bought 2 big pieces of plywood, big boards. Then he painted them and put big pro-life signs on them, and he put them on top of his car. And 6 of his buddies, who, by the way, I found out recently, all 6 of them married as virgins, and all 6 of them married virgins. They're buddies, and they made a pledge together that they were going to do this. And he's got, at 16, he put these big banners on his car, and he's driving through Ann Arbor, which is the very pagan university town. I mean, if you even have a pro-life sticker on your car, they're going to key it. They're going to take your key and scratch your car. And he was driving up and down the streets with these big pro-life signs. He said, "Dad, that was so cool. That was so much fun. Everywhere they went, they're flipping us the finger like this. And we were yelling out, 'God loves you.'" He said, "We never had so much fun in our life." He was a rebel. He doesn't have to get tattoos and rings in his nose to be a rebel. If you want to be countercultural and stand out from the crowd, you can't do it any better today than to be a Catholic and to be known as a Catholic. There's no better way to be countercultural today and to stand out from the crowd than to be a Catholic and go around with a crucifix and tell people about Jesus and his church. You're going to be considered the biggest oddball in the world. I said, "Why do you wear rings in your nose and your ears and tattoos?" I said, "Everybody's doing that." But about atheism, yes, we have the responsibility to ourselves and to our families and to the wider community, because atheism leads people to the kind of things we saw in Nazi Germany and in more than anywhere else in Soviet Union under Stalin, with millions and millions of people being killed. We talk about Hitler killing 6 million, but we don't talk about Stalin, the atheist, the communist Marxist who killed 60 million. And so we have to, not only do we have to be aware of atheism, but all the other isms. And I think you've got another ism here you're going to have to learn about pretty soon, and that's called Islam. Because Islam is another growing philosophy that does not, like a Baptist, have the idea to just sit in their little church over here and sing and get a few of you to leave the Catholic church and go sing with them. Islam has the idea that they're going to take over the world someday. This is part of the Quran. This is part of the whole philosophy. There is no distinction between religion and politics in Islam. It is Allah will have his way, and and Allah will rule in the world. And so that's another ism you're going to have to deal with very quickly, and I think that our Western world is being very naive about that ism as well, and we better wake up to that. I've been to the Middle East 70 times. I have friends who are Muslims, Jews, Christians, all Palestinians. I've been over there many times, and believe me, it's a problem. Books about it, I have shelves of them, and I know Scott Hahn just came out with a good book, Confronting the New Atheists, against Dawkins, and Patrick Madrid is coming out with a new one. I think it's going to be out next month, Confronting the New Atheism. There's a lot of very aggressive atheism today. Not even so atheism, but anti-theism, anti-Godism. And there's a lot of that out there today, and Dawkins is one of them, and I haven't read all the stuff. I wish I wasn't traveling so much. I could just sit down and read more. I used to have more time to read. But I know that there are some good books from the Catholic perspective that are confronting these things. And I'm sure, I tell you what, Parousia Media, who's back there with their T-shirts on, they get in touch with them and they can direct you to books. Even if they don't know them now, they'll find out for you. The question is, if you are knowing that we should be communicating this truth to the world, what do you do if you're in your own parish and the parish is not dealing with these issues, or the bishop, for example, and for a pro-life matter, the example is pro-life. What do you do if you never hear the pro-life message coming from the front, and it's never brought up? How do you approach it? That's a sticky question, because we also, and I will talk more about this in the next talk, but to the desire to present the truth and to promote the truth, we also have respect. And when the priest is not, many of the priests, such as, I'm politically incorrect, I'll say it the way it is, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, many of the priests and the bishops that came out of the seminaries with a teaching that had not been taught for the 2,000 years before that. There was liberalism. There was a desire to change the church into something other than what she's been for 2,000 years. And that generation is slowly, I'm not going to use that word. Slowly it's dying out. The new priests and the new bishops that the Pope is appointing and the new priests coming out of the seminary. I'm trying to be a little bit genteel here, you know. They understand what the church is and what the teachings of the church are, and they are very faithful and loyal to it. And I know that in the United States, a lot of times if I talk to older priests, not all of them, but many of them have this bent that, well, you know, it's not so bad abortion, and I'm not going to talk about contraceptions because, you know, we should change those rules. We should get women to be priests, and we should let priests marry, and we should just change the church. Those generation is dying out, and the young priests and the young bishops that are coming out are solid, good guys. There's a bishop in northern Michigan. He's only 49 years old. He's been a bishop 3 years already. And down in the southern part of Michigan, there is a bishop named Bishop Gumbleton, and he's for homosexual marriages and legalizing gay things in the priesthood and women priests. And he's a rainbow coalition. I mean, this guy, he's the whole basket of fruit. And he retired. And he had an appointment to come up and speak at a conference in Upper Michigan. And the young Bishop Sample, wrote him a letter, and he says, I have been appointed by Jesus Christ to be the bishop and protector of my diocese. Therefore, you are not allowed to come and speak in my diocese now or ever. And so this is happening. More and more of this is happening. So my point is, sometimes we just be patient, talk to the priest, talk to the bishop, gently, politely, respectfully. I always say that if we aren't complimenting the priest for all that he does do for us, hearing our confessions, confecting the Eucharist, being available at 2 a.m. if we need the anointing of the sick, if we're not thanking him for giving up so many things like wife and grandchildren and all this that he's given up so that he can serve us, his bride, the church, then we have no right going to him to complain about something else. If we aren't praying for him 10 times a day, we have no business going to him once to make a complaint. We should be praying. I'm convinced that if we prayed for our priests and bishops as much as we complained against them, we would have great bishops and priests. And I think that if we wait and keep the thing going, the grassroots Catholicism, if you don't let this taint your lives, if you don't let this liberalism or this apathy or complacency rule in your life, and you do what you're doing here today and have conferences like this, pretty soon sometimes the sheep end up leading the shepherd. Unfortunately, it happens that way. And if the grassroots Catholics rise up and they start to be pro-life and they start to speak out and they start to demand, sometimes the priests are intimidated because they're out there saying 9/10 of those people are aborting and contracepting, and if I say anything about it, the collections are going to go down, they're going to leave, they're going to get mad at me, and they find out all of a sudden because you're putting on conferences that 9 out of 10 of you are supporting these positions and want him to teach, he'll have more courage to do so. So start with yourselves and pray and work and bring back real Catholicism, not only to the parish, but to the whole world. The last question right there. Right, okay, the question for those who didn't hear it is, he appreciated what I said about comparing the personal beginning with a God and the atheist view without a God, but couldn't we talk more about God as who he is in his nature and his person? Absolutely. Time limits. You know, I had a topic, they asked me to speak about atheism, not even to talk about God, but I brought God in as a comparison to discuss atheism. Now, when I've done this talk in the past and I had all day to do it, I did this talk, which I just did, and then I come back and I say, now that we've concluded that in order to make sense of it all, there is a God, let's talk about what kind of God it would be, and then I talk about the different views of what God is, and then I get down to the third part, and I say, now that we've concluded that he's a personal, infinite God and a Trinity and all of this, now how does he reveal himself to us? How do we love him? How do we relate to him? And so on. But I'm limited to an hour and can't bring up all the whole nature of God, but to something I'd love to do, and maybe something we'll do more after Mass. But it's a good question, because God is not just an abstract philosophy. Christianity is a philosophy, but it's much more than that. It is a person. It is a person who loves us, who sacrificed himself for us, who cares about us like a father cares for his sons. And so God, if I gave the impression that we're just talking about God as an abstract thing today, I am in some degree, because we're talking philosophies. But bottom line is, this God that we're talking about created ourselves in his image, and he's a loving, personal God, and someone that we should know and love and obey.